Hello, Peter here from Knowledge Exposed, and today I would like to talk with you about how to shrink your root partition on your Linux KVM VPS. And basically, all of those three words are quite important for this process because it will totally not work on a Windows, it will totally not work on containers, and if the server is basically running on your home lab or somewhere where you can have access to it, then much better way how to do it is just basically to walk to it, stuck the USB key to it, and do this process from like the screen and keyboard. But for many people who are actually buying VPSs, there's no way how to shrink the root partition because your VPS needs to be turned off unless it's utilizing some different file system than ext4. And usually in those types of VPSs, the root file system is basically just stretching across the whole drive, which um, basically prevents you to like boot from a different partition or something and then resize the root partition and so on. So this is the process that I found out that is working for me. And if you don't have any other way how to do it, for example, through some VPS provider admin panel or something like that, or during the installation of your VPS, then this might be useful for you. And if you will find some better way and faster way how to do it, let me know, please. I know this is not the greatest tutorial, and this is totally not the greatest and most easiest approach, but it's working for me. There are some caveats with it, but it does work. So it might inspire you to dig into some other solutions or eventually just completely like or modify this one, whatever you will find useful. So there will be a few steps that we'll be following. First one is preparing your machine. We will, as you might see from the second step, we'll basically just allow it to boot from the ISO file that will be located on a drive. We will make it so that the ISO operating system is loaded into the RAM and launched from there, which basically will allow us to resize the root file system because the drive will not be used. So we will be able to do some modifications to it. And as the last thing, we'll just do a cleanup, just remove the things that we added and put it back into standard way of booting and so on. There are some things that are worth mentioning before we get into it. In quite a few steps, you can break your machine. So do it either on freshly reinstalled VPS or at least VPS that doesn't have any production or whatever important apps or data on it. Otherwise, you might just lose your data. So watch out for that. I tested it only on Ubuntu server, and it should probably work pretty well on Debian-based distributions without any problems. Even potentially on non-Debian-based distributions, you might just check the commands if they are different. And one more thing, you totally need a VNC connection through your hypervisor machine. Basically, the machine that is running your VPS should allow you to connect to your machine through VNC. Usually it's called something like an emergency console, or some other providers just call it VNC, surprise. So make sure that if you connect to this VNC and when you reboot your machine that you actually see the booting screen, because that's quite an important part of it. And with these things being mentioned, of course, yeah, I'm not responsible for your brick machine, lost data, and so on. It's just quite quirky setup, but it does work if you're willing to put the effort into it. And with that being said, let's me just switch to the command line and let's do it. Okay, here I'm logged in to my machine through SSH, and if you can see, my main drive is basically just the boot partition and 80 gigabyte root partition where all the data are. My goal for this video will be to split it into 20 gigabyte drive for a partition for a root and a 60 gigabyte partition for all the potential data. In a long term, I'm planning to run the Proxmox on this server, and my VPS provider doesn't allow me to bring my own ISO, so I'll need to install it through the Debian. So I will probably repeat the same process that I'm showing you right now on a Ubuntu. I will just basically do the same steps on a Debian and repartition the drive. So what we need to do is let's do apt update so that we can know where all the packages are. I will not do upgrade or install any other like packages that are not essential for what we're gonna do, because again, we can break the machine quite easily. And what we need to install is apt install grml rescue boot. What this package does, it basically makes it much more easier to prepare the ISO boot for our GRUB. And so you can totally do the steps that this app's allow to you manually. You can create a GRUB entry, you can point it to the drive, you can point it to the ISO file on the drive and tell it to boot from to RAM. With GRML, I would say, GRML, it's just faster to do it. And while we have it installed, it creates the new folder in our boot directory. And you can see that there is a GRML folder. And basically all the ISO files that you put into this folder and run update GRUB, it will check the folder for the ISO files and it will automatically create the GRUB entries for them. And that's what we're gonna be utilizing. But before I'll get into some more configuration, let me grab the ISO file that we'll be using. I'll be getting my ISO file for grml.org, and basically it's a small Debian-based live CD ISO meant for administrative task, deployment, and system rescue. So let's go to download. I'll grab the grml small for 64-bit computer version. Let me copy the link and go back to terminal. So now let's go to grml folder and hit wget and download the file. I'll skip this part. And now our ISO is downloaded. So if we hit update grep, we should see it. Here it goes. So now if we go to grep and check our grep CFG file and search for grml, we see that basically at the very end of the document we have the menu entry for our grml rescue system. And we'll be doing a few things now with the machine. We will first make sure that this is the menu entry that will be selected during the boot. So let me copy this. And the second thing we'll be doing is changing the kernel option so that it actually boots to the RAM. And you can also set here, for example, the SSH password. You can configure network here, or if you will go through the GRML documentation, there's quite a few things that you can modify to tweak the system while it's booting to whatever like configuration you want. So now let's make it boot from the GRML. So let's go to Win. Let's see, default grep. And here you want to locate the grep default. Let's delete this and paste our entry that we copied. Right quit. The next thing we want to do is to change the kernel option. So we want to go to Win. Let's see, grep, and I think it was 42. Well, if you're not sure what number is it, you can basically just go to that directory and hit list. So now you can see that here is the 42 grml. So let's go win 42, and we want to locate the additional parameters. and you don't want to insert it here, you want to modify it here. So let's go here and do to RAM, which will actually force the ISO to boot to RAM, surprise, and the SSH, and you can put here your super secret password. And now let's save it. Let's clean this and do update grep again. Cool. Let's check the boot grep.cfg, and let's go to default. Next. Yeah, here. So you can see set default is configured to GRML rescue system. And if we go to the end where we have our entry, now in kernel options, you can see that here is to RAM. And also here you can see your SSH password that you configured in the file. So now if you will reboot your machine, it will boot to the GRML rescue system. And this is the point when we need to switch to VNC connection. Okay, I'm using a remote connection software called Remnia, but you can use basically any VNC client that you have. And now with everything configured, we just hit reboot. And here is our machine. So let's see if it boots into GRML. And here we go. Cool. Basically, if your VNC connection triggers a little later in the boot process, you might even not see this screen, but I will just wait this time. If you don't want to wait, just hit enter, or you can even modify some more options here. So let the operating system boot. It will actually take some time, so I will skip this part. There's basically a bunch of booting happening, and you can also see some basic configurations that it will tell you that's happening during the boot. So you can see it for yourself when you actually do the process. Okay, so here we are booted in our GRML rescue boot. You can see that here is the SSH password that you set up. If you will have the network configured, you will also have some network informations here and so on. So now let's press a key. Happy hacking, cool. Let's see the drives. SDA. And here we go. So let's start resizing. So first thing we want to do is resize to key file system and def SDA2, and we want to make it 20 gigabytes. And it throws some errors, so let's do E2 FSCKA force def SDA2. And now let's try resizing. Cool. This thing took about maybe a minute, depending on how much data you have on your drive and also how big your drive is. It might take even longer or shorter time. And if we go now to fdisk, well, def SDA, you'll see that it still has 80 gigabytes. But what we can do now is change the size of it through the fdisk. So let's go fdisk def SDA, and let's see the partitions. Let's delete the second one. Oh, let's delete second one, which is default. Now we can see that there's no partition. Let's create a new one. Number 2, start from the beginning, and here you want to put the size that you actually resized it to. So I will just hit plus 20G, enter. and it gives you a warning that it contains ext for signature, and I wanna keep it, so no, do not remove it. Now, if you hit print, you can see that you have a boot partition and your 20 gigabyte root file system. If you want to create the second partition here, you can, or you can do it in your standard operating system. I'll just go ahead and do it now. So let's create new, number 3 in the beginning and all the way to the end of the size 60 gigs. So let's see, print. And with this being prepared and changed, you just want to hit W enter to write all the changes. Now, what we need to do is make our system boot back to our Ubuntu or Debian or whatever distro you have. So I'll go to temp, I'll make directory called root, I will mount dev sda2 to temp root. You can mount it basically wherever you want. I just use the temp root directory. And let's go to cd temp root. If you want to go fancy, you can just do chroot into the drive and run grub update from there. But since we just want to boot into the first option, we will just modify the GRUB CFG straight ahead. So now we are in the root directory of our drive, so we can see all the files that are actually belonging to the original or our main operating system. So let's go to boot and let's go to grub. One thing that I noticed is that the grub.cfg is set as read-only, so we need to actually change chmod to 644 for grub.cfg. And now we can see that we have read-write permissions for it. So let's do vim grub.cfg. Let's seek the default option. Next. And let's go visual till the end. Append, and we want to just choose the set default to 0. Now let's right quit, clear. And if we reboot now, we should actually reboot back into our main system. So let's do that. Reboot. And I'll see you back in Ubuntu. Cool, so let's SSH to it again. Root at your server.tld. And here we go. So let's go list, do app disk list dev sda. And here we go. Our drive is repartitioned, and what we want to do is just clean up. So let's go to boot and grml. Let's remove the ISO file. Let's go to C default. Let's open the grub file and let's change the default option to 0 again. Let's do apt remove grml rescue boot. And as we can see, it automatically updated the grub file. And that's it. Now you have your partitions one more time, dev sda. Now you have your drive repartitioned. You can basically create as many partitions as you want. Now the second one you can modify whatever you want. You can add the new entries to fstop for it if you want to mount it to a specific directory. You can change the file system on that partition. You can use BetterFS. You can basically totally separate this partition, for example, for a Ceph cluster, or since I'll be using the Proxmox on this machine, I'll use it for the containers and the KVM machines, so that it's separated from the root. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, any thoughts, ideas, let me know. If you have any better method than what I do, please let me know as well. And thank you for watching.